Verse 13 of Isaiah 7. But this section begins with verse 10, where Isaiah is told in verse 11 to ask for a miracle. The word there is sign, and we noted that word in the Hebrew is ot or oth, and deals with any mighty act of God. It's dealing with a miracle. And there's no limitation as to what this miracle would be, whether in the depth, height above, doesn't make any difference. So Ahaz is told, ask for a miracle. And this, of course, in relationship to the promise that God was giving them, or him, that Rezin and Pekah would be destroyed, and the house of Israel would continue, or house of Judah. Verse 12 then, Ahaz, in a feigned attempt at piety, says that he will not tempt God by asking for a miracle. In reality, instead of it being an act of piety or toward God, it was an act of rebellion toward God. God had told him, ask for the miracle. And he says, oh no, I'm not going to. I have too much respect for God, supposedly, as to do what God says. That gets us down to verse 13 then, that he said, hear ye now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will ye weary my God also? This is Isaiah's strong rebuke to Ahaz in not doing what God said. While Ahaz here has not been satisfied with wearying just men, but now then he's trying the patience of God himself. I think it's interesting to see a little bit of a change here. In verse 10, the Lord spake unto Ahaz, tells Ahaz, ask for a sign. Ahaz refuses. There's the rebuke, but he uses, O house of David. Hear ye now, O house of David. And then states, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary God also? God is, in effect, removing the offer that he has made to Ahaz to ask for a sign. And what we're going to see in verse 14 is that God is going to give his own sign. But now then, and this is the reason I point this out here, the Lord's going to give you a sign, but to who? He has made a change from Ahaz to the house of Israel, or the house of David, not simply to Ahaz. He's removed that offer. And so he's going to give his own sign to Ahaz, not to Ahaz, but he's giving a sign to the house of David. So verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. This verse has given rise to a great deal of controversy. And we'll look at that tonight. But notice, as we start this, God is the one who's going to give the sign now, or the miracle. And again, we mentioned that it's not to Ahaz, because he rejected it. He rejected God's offer. But now then, he's giving a sign to the house of David. The word sign, again, basically the same word as we saw in verse 11, where God makes the offer to Ahaz, ask for a sign. It's the idea of a miracle. Just as a prelude of what some of the things we will be discussing, would a young woman of marriageable age conceiving and bearing a son constitute a noteworthy sign or miracle? No. That's an everyday happening, huh? Would a virgin conceiving and bearing a child constitute a sign or a miracle? Yeah. It would. So here is, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son.
But that implies also that you have to be a well-known person, a virgin that is known of the people. You have to know it.
People would have to know it.
You have to know who she is.
Yeah. And know that she was a virgin in order for it to be really a sign. And this is kind of as an aside, since you got me on that aspect. We use the word miracle oftentimes. Really, it's signs, wonders, and really the word power. There's three aspects of miracles. One, it demonstrates the power of God, thus power. It causes amazement in people, thus wonder. It's used in relationship to miracles. And then it is a sign. A sign points to something else, points to something that is greater. There's a sign out on Interstate 10 as you're coming this way from Alabama that mentions Pensacola. Is a sign, I think it says 7 miles. Might be wrong about that, but the sign is pointing to the city of Pensacola. That's what a sign does. It points to something else. In relationship to the miracles, you have they are signs pointing to the power of God and the fact that this individual is one who is authorized by God or is speaking forth for God. So you have those three terms in relationship to miracles. Here, the term sign. Let's look at this word virgin for a little while. The Hebrew word is alma. In the early 1950s, I believe it was 1952 when the Revised Standard Version came out, the Old Testament part of it, When it got to this verse, it translated the Hebrew word alma as young woman. Caused a great deal of controversy, obviously, in relationship to this word. The basic meaning of the Hebrew word alma is a sexually mature girl. So did they translate Hebrew word alma properly when they said young woman shall conceive? Well, that's the basic meaning, a sexually mature girl. But no, they did not. They did an injustice. There's still discussions as to this word, though. Those discussions will probably go on now forever. And many times, or usually, there is that aspect of the person calling upon this, the basic meaning of the word is a young woman of marriageable age, or a young woman who is sexually mature. However, knew there was a but in there, or however, the connotative meaning is that of a virgin, an unmarried, chaste maiden. The word is found 7 times in the Old Testament. And if you want to go through those 7 times, I have them in my notes. Every time the word is used, all 7 times, it is dealing with a virgin. Unless, of course, this would be the exception. Additionally, the alma is the feminine form, dealing with a young woman. The masculine form is the Hebrew word elam. Alma would be A-L-M-A-H. The masculine form, E-L-E-M, elam. It's found 2 times in the Old Testament. Guess what it refers to? It refers to a young man who is a virgin. Then the plural form of the feminine, of alma, plural form is alamoth, A-L-A-M-O-T-H, is found 2 times in the Old Testament. Neither time is it translated. It probably has reference in those 2 times of a girls' choir. Or some have suggested that it had reference to musical instruments that were playing an octave higher. Now then, for y'all who don't know music, just accept what I said, and that's it. No, an octave, if you remember the old Sound of Music, do, a dear, that one, you go from do to do, that's 1 octave. And so an octave higher, you're going and starting higher, an octave higher on notes. But it's not translated in either place. So you have a situation where every time the word is used, it has reference to a virgin. However, words, while they have a basic meaning, are really defined by context. We've talked about that before, haven't we? I think one time I used the illustration of a bat. Without context, you don't know if I'm talking about for example, baseball bat or the animal bat. And they're spelled the same way, aren't they? Pronounced the same way. Without context, you don't know what it means. Some people have put it, context is king as far as definition is concerned. There's an element of truth to that, but there has to be a basic understanding of the word in relationship to the context. So they work together. The context of this, though, has to be not simply a young woman of marriageable age or that is sexually mature, but it would have to be because of the idea of a sign, and we'll get to this in a minute a little bit more. It has to be a virgin that he's dealing with. From there, the discussion then goes to, well, there's other words that he could have used, aren't there? For example, we could use a young woman, we could use a maiden, we could use a virgin, there's several terms that could be used in our English language to express that type of a situation. What about the other words? Okay. And I'll probably mispronounce these, but Yelahah. It's Yaleedhah is one word. A second word, Naarah, Naarah. And then the word that's usually found, Bethula. Oftentimes, those who want to argue that this should not be translated virgin will call upon this word Bethula, Bethulah, and say that if Isaiah meant a virgin, he would have used the word Bethula and not Alma. Again, not to go into too much detail, every one of those words are used of a married woman or a woman who has children. Even the Hebrew word Bethula. It is normally used, Bethula, of a virgin, but it is also used in reference to women who have children. Alma never is used in that way unless this is the exception. There's one other one, Ishah, Ishah. It's used exclusively, though, for a married woman who conceives and bears children. Thus, when you take all of this from a grammar standpoint or definition standpoint, in order to use or in order to express a virgin, the only one of these words that would really express that idea completely and totally is the Hebrew word Alma. Any of the others would not necessarily express that idea.
You mean by that the only one that would fit the context, right?
No, I'm saying the only word that would express the word virgin without any question is the Hebrew word alma. Any of the other words could be used of a virgin, but could also be used of a woman who has had a child. So I'm talking about the word itself, not context there. Any other questions on this? Because we're not through with it, but as far as that part is concerned.
Someone like that, God said, I believe it, that's it, right? So you don't have to believe it. But
Well,
you say it was a virgin, so how can you?
no, but Ray, that's the question, though. Did he say virgin? That's really the question that we're addressing. Did he actually say virgin, or did he just simply say a young woman? And that's why you look at the definition of the words as well as the context that's involved in it. Then yes, we should believe it.
A woman should be absent of virginity.
That's the whole point.
That's what I was talking about. There's only one thing that will make that statement a true statement. It's when he says a virgin. I got you on. I didn't get rid of the words.
You didn't get the words, but
I just, in my own mind, when I look at it, I don't know how you could, in that context, conceive it as being anything other
than a virgin.
you just said.
Yeah.
That virgin.
We'll look at some more evidence as well, but you're right. Within the context itself, I don't see how you can understand it as anything other than a virgin. Bill?
Matthew 1:23,
Let's wait on that for just a minute. You're getting ahead of me because we will discuss Matthew 1:23 in a minute.
there would not be any other way it could be achieved. Right?
For it to be a miracle, yes, it would have to be a virgin.
According to Barnes, the Syriac version uses a word that means utterly virgin.
Yeah.
It's a word that they translate at this point. If that means anything, I don't know.
Well, okay, the Syriac version, the Septuagint also uses the same word as in Matthew 1. And those words do mean a virgin. So that would be true. Pam.
In your studies, was it clear when they decided that virgin just meant a young woman and not a virgin? Was it, like back in the day that this was written, they accepted it as what we've always understood it to be virgin? Was it a new, when it came up later?
It came up much later. It basically comes up when you're trying to translate, when you're dealing with translation. What does this word mean? Does it mean simply a young woman, or does it mean virgin? Thus, how should it be translated into our English, and thus, how should we understand it? And that's why those who, like the Revised Standard, who argue it should be translated young woman, they go back to the very basic meaning. That is the basic meaning, a young woman. But its usage every time within the Old Testament is always a virgin. So should this be the exception of that? Well, no, especially when you look at context. I thought someone else had their hand up. Okay, then. Another aspect of this is that in the Hebrew, when it says, our English translates it, behold, a virgin. Literally, it is, the definite article, the, is before virgin or with virgin. So it should be And it literally is, the virgin shall conceive. God had a specific virgin in mind in relationship to that one specific virgin who would conceive and bear a son. Now then, the question then comes, who is this virgin? Well, surprise, surprise, there's been a whole lot of answers that have been given. I'll mention 5. And there's probably been more than that. Some have suggested that the wife of Ahaz is the young woman that is being discussed. The problem with that, if the word Alma is a virgin, has reference to a virgin and a miraculous conception and birth, Abby, Ahaz's wife, was already at this time the mother of Hezekiah, as we would see in 2 Kings 18, verses 1 and 2. So if we understand virgin or Alma as a virgin, then that doesn't fit, because she's already had a son, Hezekiah. A very popular view, though, is that this is supposedly Isaiah's wife. What did we read in verse 3 of this chapter, though? What was Isaiah supposed to do? Take his son, what was his name? Shear-Jashub. Take your son with you. So she's not a virgin, is she? And if Alma means a virgin, then that doesn't fit either.
She's got that older son, she's not a young woman.
I'm not going to comment on that one. There are some women who start young, so...
He had to be at least 12, 14.
Not necessarily.
How old was the son?
We don't really know.
But he had to be more than 12.
Why?
Why would anybody take a 2-year-old?
Let me answer that one when we talk about verse 16. Because that's going to tie into what we see there. And just as a prelude to that, before the child, what child? Some think it's, as I do, that it's Shear-Jashub. Before he knows to refuse the evil and choose the good. Thus, it would indicate a much younger child than someone who would be 12 or 13 or that age group. But she had already given birth to him, though, at this time. So she would not be a virgin. Now, to me, this one's kind of ridiculous, but some have presented the idea that it is the personification of the house of Israel. Now, how they get that, I have no idea, but it is an idea that has been presented. I think probably to try to offset that it refers to Christ and it has a fulfillment in Christ, but yet for Jews today, how would you explain it? Other than, well, it's maybe the house of Israel itself that's referring to. I don't really know how they get it It just is an idea that has been presented to explain who this virgin is, the personification of the house of Israel.
Yeah, but they weren't a virgin. They went after idols, went after Baal, Asherah, and a bunch of others. Basically, our spiritually in a lot of cases, except for a remnant. The remnant were.
If you're dealing with the house of Israel, they would have been married in a sense, from that figurative sense, to God. They committed adultery, spiritually adultery, in going after idols. So, as I say, I don't really know how they get to this idea, but it is an idea.
The simple thing is, none of these women you're gonna mention have a son named Emmanuel.
Well, y'all keep getting ahead of me. Yes, we'll discuss that part of it also. One of the most popular theories today, and advocated by a lot of members of the church, a lot of very scholarly members of the church, is what is referred to as a double fulfillment idea. The claim is that it has primary reference to a girl of Isaiah's day who was a virgin when Isaiah says this, who later marries and then bears a son, and that she thus becomes a type of Mary, and thus a secondary fulfillment in relationship to Mary and the Christ. And supposedly in this, then, Matthew sees the virgin birth of Christ as a typological fulfillment of the young woman that Isaiah is discussing. I say there are a lot of brethren today within the church who hold this view.
It would seem to me like you have to have a record of it somewhere here where that really happened. It was fulfilled. You don't have any record of anybody having a child ever.
Well, as they say, as I said, in relationship to this idea of a double fulfillment, they believe that when Isaiah says this, she is a virgin, later marries and has a son. So usually they call upon chapter 8 in Meir Shalahashbaz. Of course, their parallel doesn't really fit that either, because Meir Shalahashbaz is the son of who? Isaiah. His wife has already had, at this time, Shirajashub. You keep coming back to that we're going to get to in a few minutes. Yes, he does, not named Emmanuel. Pam?
What vested interest do they have in believing of the double fulfillment?
The thrust of that idea is that there has to be a time element in relationship to the prophecy of that day and that time. And so they would say a prophecy of the Messiah 7 centuries later does not give the time frame of that time. What comfort would it be to Ahaz or to the house?
They're coming up with a logical, this is not logical not to have some fulfillment then, so
that the fulfillment of this has to be sometime during Isaiah's day. Isaiah's day. That it has to be fulfilled during that time frame in order for it to be something that would apply to them of that day and time.
do they believe that all prophecy has a
Not all not all prophecy, no. Because some, in relationship to this one, they just deal with this in Isaiah 7. You have these two nations, Syria and Israel, joining forces to come against Jerusalem and Ahaz. And God is saying, you don't have to worry about those because they're going to be destroyed. What would 700 years down the line give comfort to him at that point in time? What? Well, that's the thing. That's one of the things that I don't think that they realize. But because of that, because of that time element, they say it had to be someone during that time frame. It could not be something beyond that or way down the line. My view, which is the correct view, obviously, is that this is an exclusive reference to the virgin birth of Christ and nothing else.
All we have had to do is just wait for that to happen. If it never happened, he may die, it never did happen. So, he was still safe.
I'm not sure I follow that one, but
Just keep waiting.
they keep.
Wait for that person to have a baby, and it never happened, it never happened. Well, if he dies, which he still hadn't had it, it will happen 700-800 years later.
Okay. Dale.
If a young girl, at the time spoken, is a virgin, and then she gets pregnant, well, she's no longer a virgin, number one. Number two, he's certainly not God with us. You don't have omniscience or omnipotence and blah, 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 blah. You go on
Y'all just keep insisting of going to that word. Let me give you a couple reasons why this double fulfillment cannot be correct. Number one, and here's what I think Bill brought up earlier, Matthew. Matthew applies this to a virgin. And now remember, we said it is the virgin. And Matthew says the virgin had reference to Christ, or Mary, and her conceiving and bearing Christ. Matthew has a virgin, not a virgin who becomes a non-virgin and bears a son. Now, those who have this double fulfillment have to have, she is a virgin when Isaiah says it, but then she marries and then afterwards has a son. Matthew doesn't have that. It's not consistent with the typology that Matthew would give. So if Isaiah had reference to a young woman of that day, then there has to be two virgin births. Second, if Isaiah referred to a virgin at the time of the prophecy who later marries and then conceives and has a son, then you have an antitypical interpretation. Here's Isaiah. Matthew uses Isaiah's prophecy in relationship to Mary. Thus, Mary would have been a virgin at the time that God came or told her about she's going to bear a son, who then married Joseph, and then conceived and had a son, in order for the parallel to be true. So if the birth of this Emmanuel in Isaiah's time was a natural birth, then the figure would have to be that Mary's birth would have been a natural birth. Or else the figure doesn't hold true. So it must be an exclusive reference to the birth of Jesus. This is the case because of it being a miracle, a sign. It has to be the case because of the use of the word "the virgin" and not simply "a virgin." But then Matthew's inspired commentary. Matthew uses in Matthew 1:23 a specific word which means, without any shadow of doubt, and everyone agrees to it, virgin, and not just a young woman. Matthew's is an inspired commentary on what Isaiah said. If we can trust Matthew and what he says, then Isaiah had to have reference of a virgin. And then that y'all kept wanting to get to, Emmanuel, means God with us. He will be both divine and human in nature. Who, other than the Christ, was both God and man? Who could have that title of Emmanuel other than Jesus Christ? Could anyone? Could any child of Isaiah's day? No one could other than Christ. No one else. And so this has to be, from you taking all of the information, it has to be a direct reference only to Christ. But now then, in answer to this idea that those who hold this double fulfillment, that there has to be a time frame during that time, verse 15 and 16 answers that. Which, because of time, get that time, we won't enter into tonight, because I know that there's less than a minute left to go before Andrew rings the bell, and it would take us longer than that in reference to verse 15, so we'll stop at that point.